Let's just see. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's your favorite time of the week once again, Keepin It Rio time. And today we have got episode 235. And I'm ecstatic for today's episode because our guest today is going to bring some really informative and insightful content to us about a subject that I think we all probably can agree is something that we all possess at some time. So, without any hesitation, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome our guest to the show, Kam Knight. Kam, welcome to Keepin It Rio. How are you doing, my friend?
I am doing amazing, Chuck. Thank you for having me on. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think we're going to have a great conversation today
Yeah.
because I can directly relate to exactly what you're going to be talking about. And I love to get the insights to kind of help me understand what's going on in my noggin, but I know it's going to
Yeah.
help everybody else as well. So, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and then we'll just run with it?
All right. Sounds good. So, my name is Kam Knight. I am a mentor, international speaker, and an author of a dozen books in the area of mental, physical, and emotional performance. And as far back as I can remember, I've been a fairly driven individual. It's kind of hard not to be living in this culture where there is just so much personal development content. And in many ways, with so many people telling you to do more and be your best self, I've always been a fairly driven individual, wanting to do more, have more, and be more in life. And although I feel like I've had my fair share of success, I always felt like I missed the mark or I fell short or the success was much more difficult and challenging than it needed to be. And I always wondered why that was. Why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it. And, at the time, there were no clear answers. The best answers I came across were beliefs, or you need motivation, or you have to have discipline. And all those things are important, though I always felt like there was more to it. And over the last 15 to 20 years, that question lingered in my mind. Every time I felt stuck, I wondered why. Why can't I get stuff done? Why do I keep spinning my wheels? Why don't I just do this dang thing so I can get the result that I want? And so the more books I read, more coaching I did, and seminars I attended, the more I was learning about the complexities of the human brain. And the one thing that kept coming up was, oh, this is what holds you back, or this is what's going to get in the way, or this is, what creates some challenges. And over time, my brain began taking this information. And at a certain point, I was like, hey, wait a minute. There's a part of our brain designed to hold us back. There's a part of our mind built to keep us from growing and making progress. And I call this part resistance. And it's a brick wall that we hit anytime that we want to do something, but we can't no matter how much we want to do it.
I can appreciate that. And Lord
Yes.
knows, I'm a prime example of this. There are all kinds of
Yeah.
things that I know how to do, that I want to do, that I should do. And for whatever reason, I just don't do them in a timely manner. And
Yeah.
when I saw what we were going to talk about today, this really excited me because I do think that I can gain some valuable insights here. And a lot of the questions I'm going to ask are going to be, related to me personally. But
Sure.
I know this is something that impacts everybody. We all have that day where you don't want to get out of bed or you don't want to go outside because it's raining and you need to
Yeah.
go do something, but you decide not to. And then you think about it after the fact. So let's kind of dive in a little bit on this and understand a little bit better what the mindset is and what causes these types of thoughts to enter into your head.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that cause people to, not get things done when they know that they should?
Yeah, so it helps to understand that the part of the brain that creates wants and desires, it works separately and independent of the part that allows you to act on that desire. So this is extremely important, so I'm going to say it again. The part of the brain that creates wants works separately from the part that allows you to act on that want. So we have one part of the brain that it's creating wants and is more or less creating endless wants one after another. It doesn't check to see if we have the time, energy, or resources. It simply creates wants. That's only its only job. And then we have this other part that gives a green light on the want and desire. So this is the part that checks to see if we have the time, energy, and resources. So what's really important to understand about this is that it is possible for the brain to both create a desire for something and at the same time keep us from going after it. And for a long time, I used to think whoever created humanity must have been really sick and twisted, because how could they do this to us? Like, how could they create this burning desire in us and then keep us from going after it? It made no sense. But it makes perfect sense when you realize that the part that is creating the want and the part that's allowing it to act on the want is the two separate mechanisms in the brain that are going on. And the way this process plays out is anytime we have a want or desire, it gets evaluated by this part of the brain, which I call resistance, using a whole host of criteria. And if the desire is not in line with any of the criteria, the brain will prevent action. So it helps to think about standing before a panel of judges or board of directors, because every decision that comes up must go through them. And if even one of the members is against the idea, it will not pass. And so what's really interesting about this concept is that both our wants and resistance can get in our way. So it doesn't really matter how much motivation a person has, how simple the solution is, or even how much benefit that we'll gain. What matters is if understanding these parts, how these parts work, and more importantly, how they get in our way. And so now that we kind of understand that, it gives us a better insight as to why a lot of times when we want to do something, we can't. And it comes really down to that this part of the brain isn't giving the green light.
I can definitely understand that. And it
Yeah,
makes perfect sense. You know, I've always got the little angel and the little devil is the way I
that's
kind of refer to them on either one of your shoulders. And, you know, this one wants you to go do something fun, but this one says, well, wait a minute. If we go do something fun, we're not going to do
uh,
this over here that we're supposed to be doing. And it's an
yeah,
eternal struggle that I've got going on over here. So the
yeah,
question that I have as it pertains to this is, how do we get both sides in line with each other? Because I know a lot of very productive individuals. I know folks that don't deal with this, you know,
yeah.
at least outwardly or publicly, and they seem to always be getting these goals accomplished, even when they don't want to do it. And I always wondered, you know, what is the mind frame that you need to put yourself in, or what are some of the things that you can do to kind of get both of those to align so that you can
Yeah.
actually go out and do the things that you want to do?
Yeah. So, very interesting question. And before I answer, I do want to rip on that. So, that concept that you brought up of the devil and the saint, it really is that's what's going on. They're just two voices, and it's really not a devil or saint per se. One is just a want that's pushing you to go after things, and the other is more or less a resistance that's holding you back. And through media, we've given it these symbols of devil and saint, but it's not good or bad. It's just one's a push to move forward and one's holding us back. A great analogy for this is thinking about a kid in a candy store. So the kid in the candy store is like our wanting mechanism that just wants the things. And then the parent is like the resistance that's trying to keep the kid in check. And so the question you're asking is there's really no simple answer. And if it was, I would be a billionaire because there would be
Yeah,
the million
right.
dollar answer. But to understand how resistance work, as I mentioned, anytime a decision stands before us, it gets evaluated by a whole host of criteria. So to really understand how we can move forward and get aligned, it helps to understand what the criterias are. And some of the more commonly known or obvious ones include things like limiting beliefs or habits or comfort zone. You know, if we don't have beliefs in line with what we're trying to do, the brain's going to hold us back. If what we're trying to do goes against our habits, habits going to say, nope, this is what we've become used to, and doing that thing is going to create pain to start doing. So it's going to hold us back. And then we all know about the comfort zone. The more we move out of our zone of comfort or familiarity, the more resistance shows up, because the brain likes, in a lot of ways, familiarity. Even though it's painful or annoying, it'll still keep us in it, because knowing is better than unknowing to the brain in many ways. Though these reasons get really deep and complex, it can deal with self-image. So many people have created a self-image of themselves where they see themselves as cool, studious, tech savvy, or that they have this great story, or they're a great artist, comedian, and storyteller. But they rarely apply themselves or put themselves out there, because if things don't go well or they experience difficulty, they have to face the fact that they're not this great self-image that they have created for themselves. So a lot of times it's easier to not do the thing and hold on to the self-image than to do it and face a possibility of proving it wrong. So that's another reason resistance will come up. The brain will say, hey, will this damage our self-image, or does it have a potential to? And if it does, it'll keep us from going after it. But it goes even deeper. It goes into concepts like authority issues. Authority issues relate to our unconsciously held attitudes toward authority figures, such as parents, principals, priests, police officers, and even personal development mentors like myself. And the way authority issues works is, as we're growing up, if we had a lot of like nagging parents, teachers, and bosses always telling us what to do and how to do it and what not to do and how not to do it, at a certain point, the brain gets fed up and doesn't want to listen and do anything it's told. And so a lot of times when we want to do something, we can, because this authority issue response kicks in, because if it will please an authority or give them satisfaction, the brain's going to say, no, I don't want to. But it goes even deeper than that. It can involve the inner child. So the inner child is this kind of concept that as we're growing up, if we had felt abandoned when we were young, that part that felt abandoned still lives inside us. And as we're growing and doing more things, it feels like it'll get abandoned again. And so it sabotages us from going out and doing things. So that's another criteria. And then it can go into family systems, and it gets quite deep. And in my work, I found that there's like about over 25 to 30 criteria the brain evaluates to see if we should do something. So to answer your question, long story, to circle back, it's like, well, how do we make it so it's easy to move forward with what we want? Well, we got to work on a lot of these things. And as you had mentioned, some people have the ability to just do what it is that they want. And if we ever wondered why that was, it wasn't because they had some special ability. It's because they didn't have what the rest of us have, which is resistance. Their beliefs are in line, their habits are in line, their brain is comfortable stepping out of their comfort zone. They likely don't have authority issues and all these things. So they can go from desire to action a lot easier than someone who has these things going on. And it kind of sucks, but for some people, the more limiting criteria, let's just say, there are, the harder it is for them to do things, stick with things, and actually get to the finish line, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And it kind of leads me into the next question I had, which is, you talked about all the different variables that are involved. And obviously everybody's mind is different. Everybody lives their own reality and their own life. So no two are the same. But what about the impact that the people that you put around you, your family, your peers, the folks that you spend time around the most, how does that, or how much of that can also be a factor in your own limiting beliefs? What I'll use as an example is, say, I was reading a story just before we came on here. A lady had lost like 150 pounds, and she said that her husband was not supportive. He was kind of being mean about it, and I liked you better the other way, which in my opinion would illustrate that, that person is aware of the fact that they're not doing the same level of work as someone that's
Yeah.
close to them. But how does that mentally affect both parties? The one that, number one, wants to improve but feels that they're being pulled back, and the other one that doesn't want to improve at all and therefore feels like they have to be a negative influence on the other person to kind of bring them back to what they would consider normal.
Yeah. So this is one of the challenges to growing because we are very much influenced by the people around us. And not only the people around us, but our environment. So if in our environment there are a lot of distractions, or if there are a lot of stimuli that will take us away from our commitment. So let's say a person has a goal to diet or lose weight, but in their environment, there's a lot of junk food and cupcake and things like that. It's gonna be much more challenging, but they have to constantly resist these triggers and stimuli that's pulling them towards the things that are going to pull them away from the goal. But the people is huge and on many levels. So the first level is, as humans, we have an entire network of neurons called mirror neurons, and their sole purpose is to mirror the behaviors of the people around us. And just to give you a small glimmer of how much it's picking up other behaviors, I'm going to share a story. So several years ago, I was in Australia. No, I was in Thailand, and I had met a woman in the hostel I was staying at, and I told her, I'm like, she had a really particular accent, and I'm like, you know, I was saying, like, based on your accent, you sound like you're either from Germany or Holland. She's like, yeah, I'm from Holland. And I'm like, based on your accent, it sounds like you spent some time in Australia. She's like, yeah, spent I just finished doing a 2-year work abroad in the country. And I'm like, based on your accent, it sounds like you were either living in Sydney or Melbourne. She's like, I was living in Melbourne. And she didn't even realize she picked up the accent of the place he was around. And that's how influential being around people are. We're picking up the thoughts, behaviors, actions, and reactions of others around us. And just by being around other people, we are essentially falling in line with their thoughts, actions, behaviors, and reactions. And if it's unproductive or not conducive to what we want, it just makes it much more challenging because we have this unconscious internal part that's mimicking these people around us while we want to do something else. So that just creates a struggle right there. But another level why the people we're around has such an influence on us is a concept that doesn't get a lot of attention, but we all experienced it recently with the events of COVID. We humans are at the most basic fundamental level lonely beings. We are mammals and we are pack animals. And we evolved to live and survive in a pack. And in order to do that, we evolved with certain characteristics to keep us in the pack. And one of the characteristics was the pain of loneliness. Like we have a deep rooted pain of loneliness that forces us to be around and connect with others. And as a result, we become extremely sensitive to blending in with the people around us. In fact, loneliness is more painful than physical abuse. And as a result, loneliness will force us to compromise our beliefs, values, and even our behaviors so we can fit in and assimilate with the groups. Even if what the group behavior is doing is unhealthy, unproductive, or unconstructive for us. As I mentioned, loneliness is more painful than physical abuse. So it would rather conform to unhealthy behaviors or even accept unhealthy treatment just to not feel loneliness. And so for around people who aren't healthy for us, it's by the nature of just being around them, we're still going to pick up those things. And if we're trying to do something different, it just becomes hard and a struggle. In fact, it was, to get to the point that I am right now in my journey of the diet that I have, the health that I'm trying to maintain, the progress I'm trying to make in my life, as well as the growth I focus on, I'm extremely cautious about the people who I allow into my life. In fact, I'll go as far as to say, if you can control the people you allow into your life, the rest becomes easy. And I am very quick to cut people out, to ghost people. In fact, my sister often jokes, Cam was ghosting people before it was actually a thing. And it's true. Like, I've been doing it for a long time. It's like, as I'm growing, if people aren't going with me or supporting me, I will, move on. And it's not that I do it in a malicious way. I do feel bad and I do try to bring them with, but not in line with where I'm trying to go or the direction that I am headed in. Then I do make a choice. It's like, okay, is this person going to serve me or not? And I move forward because of how important the people around us is. So I know I'm kind of talking a lot, so cut me off anytime. But I do want to answer another part of the question, which is, what about the people who pull the others down? And yes, that does happen. And it comes down to the loneliness factor. If we are at our core, the fundamental characteristic of human beings is loneliness, and someone is doing better and they're growing, there's a chance that they might leave us. And so the natural response is to halt their progress so they don't. So they kind of stay at our same level. And again, it happens unconsciously. I don't think people are trying to make it difficult others for them to grow, but unconsciously they do feel like, hey, if this person does better, starts growing, they may find other people and leave us. And so the natural response is to kind of try to tell them or try to help them stop. And so I could see why that person who made it difficult for his wife was doing what he was doing. He he was just being human in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean it's a challenge. So it's something to be aware of too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you just completely nailed that. You hit the bullseye exactly as I was expecting on that. And
Yeah.
the reality of the matter is, I think that a lot of people, like you said, are more concerned about being alone or feeling lonely to the point to where they're willing to stay in negative scenarios
Yeah.
just to have that comfort. And that ultimately, that's one of the main factors why they never continue to progress out of that natural fear of loneliness. But
Yeah.
let's talk about people that are on the opposite end of that spectrum. And what I mean by this is, for example, I'll use myself as an example here. I grew up in Ohio and I lived there for 32 years. And I was kind of in a rut, sort of. I had a
Yeah.
good paying job and I was doing things and I bought a house and I was doing all right. I had a nice car going and all that. But I knew that there was more that I wanted to accomplish in life. And basically, I convinced myself that as long as I stayed in that environment, I was never going to progress beyond it because there
Yeah.
wasn't anything that was really there in front of me that I could shoot for. So I get an opportunity in 2010 to move to North Carolina, Charlotte, 8 hours away from home. I moved to a town where I've never thought I would live. I don't know anybody. I have no friends, no family, nothing around. But I think for some reason that motivated me to be more proactive in doing things that I may not have done before. And it was really remarkable because when they asked me, I think that they were expecting me to need to think about it, but I immediately said, yes, I want to do it. I moved to Charlotte and I felt instantly like I had a larger purpose for myself to fulfill. I did that for a few years and then that same feeling came over me again. I ended up moving to Texas and I've been here in Texas since 2012, but I've moved to two different cities. I
Yeah.
moved to College Station, Texas. I didn't know anybody there. And then I moved to San Antonio, Texas, and I started we restarted a roofing company that was already out of business. So I didn't know anybody. I had no friends, family, network, nothing. And I consciously made these decisions because I felt like I was being stagnant and I
Yeah.
felt like I wasn't growing in the areas that I was putting myself into. So what happens when you're willing to do all of that stuff, but you still end up eventually over the course of time, whether you either diminish your own value in your mind to where, well, whatever, this is all I'm going to be, or you just get to the point where you say, man, now I'm in a completely different place and I don't know anybody. Now I'm even more lonely. What's some advice for people like that try their best to be proactive, try their best to go out and do things, are willing to make those environmental shifts for the betterment of themselves, but even still find a way to get into a rut to where it's like, oh man, there are days where I don't feel like going out and doing my work, I don't feel like talking to people, and then other days it's the exact opposite. So how do you control a situation like that when it's more of a internal without a lot
Yeah.
of those external factors? How do you convince yourself at that
Yeah.
point?
So there's a couple things to talk about based on what you said. So one, you were able to move, and it was much easier for you than more people than other people. And one thing I didn't point out in my previous answer is that not everyone has the same level of loneliness. Some people have it much stronger, and the stronger our loneliness, the more the brain will compromise our beliefs, values, as well as our desires and behaviors to kind of conform to the norm. And the more it'll make it hard for us to change and make the shifts that you did. So I have met in my travels people who have never left their hometown. Like I actually remember when I was in Lima, Peru, and I was in the cab with the taxi driver. We were talking, and I was telling him how I was kind of traveling. He's like, I've never left Lima. And I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. Because for me, um, just the way I am, it sounds like a novel, such an out there concept. I'm in many ways a vagabond, but for him, he has his family, he's got everything, and it kind of fits that need. So it does vary depending on person to person, and that degree of variance is does contribute to one's ability of what they're able to do and how far they're able to stretch themselves. So the more loneliness someone has, the harder it may be for them to shift. Or if they are in a situation where they are lonely, then it'll be easier to make that shift. Now, to really get into that answer, we have to kind of look at a concept called the tricks of resistance. When the brain holds us back, let's just say we have a desire, it filters through the criterias, and the desire is not in line with the criteria, and the brain says, we can't let you do it. So when the brain holds us back, it doesn't actually tell us it's holding us back or give us a reason. It shows up in manipulative ways, which are called the tricks of resistance. And the brain has all sorts of tricks that keeps us from moving forward. So I would say that the fact that you were traveling from one place to another and not finding satisfaction could have been a trick of the resistance. Maybe you had this desire underneath, but your brain felt like it you couldn't have it or it was too dangerous to have it. So it said, you know what? Why don't we just move to a completely different city and start all over? Because it was a perfect distraction to keep you from going after this deeper thing that you wanted. And then you did this other thing and you still weren't satisfied. And instead of looking at what was keeping you from being satisfied, the brain is like, let's move somewhere else. And as long as, and I know what moving is like. When we're moving, it takes a lot of energy and time. And it's a perfect way to distract us from the thing the brain is avoiding. And you said you moved actually quite a bit because even when you got the Texas, you kind of moved around and then
Yep.
you started this job. So it sounds like in some ways, what you what you thought you were doing to chase fulfillment was really a trick of your brain to keep you distracted. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and
Yeah.
I've never had that explained that way,
Yeah.
but it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
And I don't understand everything that goes on in my own mind because I
Yeah.
don't know what I was, what it was that I ultimately really wanted. But
Yeah.
along the process, you start to you change, and your desires change, and your wants change, and your
Yeah.
needs change, and then it's like you get to a certain point where, okay, like you said, there are two different parts of your brain. One's pushing you, one's pulling you, and you start looking at things like your career.
Yeah.
You focus more on your work, and there's something that you're not paying attention to on the personal side.
Yeah.
And I guess the question I would have next is, if you've got yourself so far involved in one thing that the other thing doesn't exist anymore, whether it be personal to business, business to personal, whatever it may be, are there ways that you can go about kind of reprogramming yourself to get those two aspects of your life more in line with each other? Because it just became very obvious to me that, my entire work life has been about, I want to do the work, I want to do the company, I want to build, but the
Yeah.
personal life has never really been that awesome. And I'd love to have a little bit more balance in my life with that. So,
Yeah.
one thing about me is I do believe that I have discipline. I do have I have the intestinal fortitude. I get up every morning. This morning on my social media, it
Yeah.
was, I didn't want to get out of bed, but I got up at 3 o'clock and I went to the gym and I did a full workout, and then I went on about my day. But let's just say that you're always keeping yourself busy so that you're not distracted, or you are distracted and you don't want to be as distracted anymore. What are some of the things that you can do as a person to kind of, maybe shift the balance a little bit in one
Yeah.
direction or the other?
Yeah. So it sounds like, because in my previous answer, I wasn't suggesting that you were in distracted mode, which is why you were moving from city to city and focusing more on work. But now that you are saying, yeah, but you put a lot more time in your professional life and not so much on your personal. And that could have been by design, by resistance, because maybe there was a deeper yearning for developing your personal life or finding that special someone or developing a family. But for some reason, your brain felt like it was too dangerous. Maybe you have feelings of undeserving. Maybe there's some fear, all of that. And so the brain said, well, why don't we just distract you by moving and starting these projects and doing the productive things versus the more personal things? But if we do want to start shifting, it all comes down to reprogramming. It's not something that we can just make a conscious decision necessarily and say, okay, this is a direction I want to go. Because the way resistance works is, unless we deal with the actual cause of the resistance, it will always fight with our efforts. It will fight with our efforts until the day we die. And so if a person is trying to make a change, even if it's something like diet, finding another job, or progressing in their career, and there's some part of them internally that's holding them back, using willpower and conscious decision can only take us so far. Like I said, resistance will fight with our efforts until the day we die. So we need to start reprogramming. There's many ways to do that. There's a lot of modalities that are becoming popular, a lot more popular now, that helps us kind of tap into what's going on internally a lot more. Though I think the simplest way is with the use of self-talk. Self-talk are statements that you say or repeat to yourself of the changes that you want to have or have happen. For example, a simple example, let's say I want to become a more assertive person. Now, I can go out and read books about assertiveness and try to memorize the techniques, practice them, and try to force myself to apply it. But an easier approach is just to repeat statements like, I'm a strong, assertive communicator. I easily communicate my needs and wants. But it may not seem like repeating such statements could have that much effect, but I would say it would have much more effect than going out and doing the brute force conscious work on improving assertiveness. Because when we repeat positive statements, those statements go into our mind and actually rewire our brain to act that out. So we can create self-talk statements around the changes that we want. For example, would you say my ability to articulate and communicate myself is, halfway decent?
Yes, I absolutely would.
Yeah, thank you. And that wasn't always the case. In fact, I had extreme difficulty communicating. I would stutter, stammer. It was difficult to get my thoughts out, and people really understood, what I wanted to say. And the way I changed that is I created a set of statements of the outcome I desired. So I regularly repeat, I am an excellent communicator. I easily communicate my thoughts, ideas, feelings, experiences, and more. I can write about and verbalize anything. No matter who the person or what the situation, I'm at complete ease. And as I repeated this, I naturally started to be able to communicate better. And yes, I did put effort and practice, but if I just focused on the practice part of it, I wouldn't have progressed as much as if I had actually added the self-talk. So to answer your question about reprogramming, I think reprogramming is quintessential when we are trying to move past resistance. We have to work at the unconscious level to essentially reprogram our mind to not have as much resistance. And then, like I said, there's many ways to go about it, but the simplest is self-talk. It's as easy as essentially writing down the outcome that we want and turning them into statements and repeating the statement. And the key is repeating, because when I use the word self-talks very deliberately, I don't say affirmations, because affirmations, people can write affirmations, you can put it on a mirror and look at it. But the reason I say self-talk is because you want to repeat it. You can either repeat it out loud or in your head, but the key is to repeat it. And the more you repeat it, the more those words go in and start rewiring the brain to act things out naturally. So we don't have to put so much effort in fighting resistance to do it. I hope that makes sense.
That makes absolutely perfect sense. I
Yeah.
appreciate that very much. And I think this is an amazing topic. I am just absolutely enamored with this conversation right now. I would like to ask you a question. When we started
Sure.
the episode, you mentioned that you had written 12 books. You're now
Yeah.
my 37th different author that I've had on the podcast. I've had 18 bestsellers. Every single individual that writes a book of some sort has a unique story about how their process went along. I know that
Yeah.
this isn't relative to what we were just discussing, but I do want to ask you about the book writing process for yourself, having multiple books that have been published. Let's talk a little bit about that experience as well. What inspired you initially to write the first book and then the subsequent editions that came after?
Very interesting question. And so for me, at a certain point in my life, I had an itch to write. It was an overpowering itch that I couldn't resist. I didn't know where the itch came from, why it was there. And in fact, I was not a good writer. In fact, I did much better in math and science. And I was actually an accountant, a CPA, and a very good one. But this itch was overpowering that I couldn't resist. And so I followed it. And in the beginning, my writing wasn't good. In fact, it took me a long, long time to write and finish my first book. I would say it took me over 2 years. And I would spend like an entire hour on a single paragraph. Oftentimes, that paragraph wouldn't get used. But that's just how overpowering this like drive I had to write. And as I have traveled, I've traveled to over 100 countries now, and I didn't just travel to touristic destinations. I literally traveled to all corners of the globe, from third world countries to developing nations to first world, um, interacting with some of the most isolated indigenous tribes to some of them, and going to some of the most isolated places in the world, like the oldest rainforest in the world in Asia as well as Africa and things of that nature. And I got connected to humanity in a deep level in a way that can't really describe. But one thing I realized why this need to write came up, and I believe it comes up for a lot of people. In fact, there's a lot of studies that say that like 84 to like 92% of people say they have a book inside them, and it's because of this one particular thing. So and that particular thing is to complete the human cycle. What I mean by that is when we are born, we are completely helpless. We need the help of others to take care of us. But then as we start getting older, we aren't as helpless. So once we start becoming toddlers, we can walk and essentially talk and do things for ourselves, but we still need the help of our parents. And then when we get into our teenage years, we become more self sufficient. And although we don't need as much support still. And then we get to a point where we become a fully functional adult where we really don't need any support. But at that point, we really can't focus on anybody else. We can just focus on what we need to do for ourselves. But then as we get older, we have enough experiences where we can think about others. And this is when, around the time we start having kids. So we can start giving back. And when we have kids, we are built to teach the child what we learned as we were growing up, so the child could be prepared to you know to handle the world. And so that innate drive that we have to impart our knowledge to the younger generation so they have the tools and resources to grow is, I believe, where a lot of our drive to write a book comes from. It's this drive to impart what we know to help the next generation or to help someone. And this desire or drive shows up in many ways. For some people, like I know an immigrant who wants to help other immigrants succeed, right? Or I know entrepreneurs who want to help other entrepreneurs based on their journey and what they learned. They want to shortcut the process for other entrepreneurs. Same thing for mothers and things like that. So it's this like innate drive that we have to impart what we learn to help others or the next generation. And for many of us, I think it shows up in this desire to write a book. Now, when a person does want to write a book, they're not going, oh, yeah, I have this desire to impart this knowledge. They just feel this need to write a book. And I think that's where my drive came from, was as I was getting older, becoming more self-sufficient and learning these things that I wish somebody had told me, or I wish I had known to make my path a little bit easier. I wanted to impart onto others. And so that, in many ways, was where my drive to write a book came from. In fact, when I got to that point of writing my own book, it was because a lot of the stuff I came across wasn't helpful. You remember in the beginning of the podcast when I was introducing myself, I said the best information I got was beliefs and motivation and discipline. And what I learned, there was so much more to it. And I felt like this could be very useful, which is why I wrote the books. And I'm here on this podcast talking about this concept that I feel like, I mean, I would go as far as to say it's pretty new or novel for a lot of your listeners.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think that's the best part about this. We just met 2 minutes before we started
Yeah.
recording this, and neither one of us knew what to expect from the other. And this has been an absolutely amazing conversation that's opened up a lot of thought for myself. And I've
Yeah.
also thought about a lot of people that I know and people that I've met along the way that I've seen these experiences take their toll on, and I've seen them act in ways that aren't probably who they really are. So that is tremendous. And as it pertains to the book, I think that's a great way of looking at it. And I understand completely your need to do that. I think at some point I'm going to write a book as well. I've got
Yeah.
several friends that have already done that. And I think you're spot on. The desire to help others to not have to deal with the same kind of things I did in the future would be my main goal.
Yeah.
With the other books that you wrote after you got your first one under your belt, are all of your books relative to the same subject matter, or did you go out there and write, here's one about how to prune trees, here's one about how to make the best meatloaf? What are the other books about? Are they all kind of in a series?
In some respects, majority of my books are in the area of mental, physical, and emotional performance. So the books you see behind me, and one is on speed reading, the other one's on memory, the other one's on concentration. I have a book on mind mapping. So that all encompasses mental performance. I also have books on self-talk, visualization, and goal setting, which is, a lot of personal mastery. This concept of internal resistance I developed after I had written all those books. So after my 10th book is when I started to think about, oh, wow, there's a part of our brain that's holding us back. And I didn't put this into a book. I actually put this into a course that people can get on my website, kamknight.com. It's just a deeper topic. And I don't think it's a book it's not a concept that I think in a course type setting, it's much more easily delivered in a more accessible way. So that's why I did it that way. I did veer off. I did write a book on saving money because, as I mentioned, I traveled to 100 countries, and I didn't do it because I was some sort of millionaire or billionaire. I did it by being very careful of how I spent money. So I wrote a book about that. But for the most part, it's been mainly in the personal development realm. And what's really interesting is, why did I write 12 books? It's because it was my trick. So remember I talked about the tricks of resistance? When the brain wants us to stop us from doing something, it doesn't tell us it is. Instead, it uses manipulative tricks. Well, every time I finished the book, it was time to market it and put myself out there. But a part of my brain was resistant to that. It didn't want to put in the effort required to market it, and it was afraid of the feedback and criticism. And so it would always throw up these ideas for the next book and be like, oh, yeah, you should write this book. This will be the book that you'll feel confident about. This will be a great topic. People will really love it. So I would write that book. And as you know, writing a book isn't easy. It takes months and years. So the months and years I was spending on writing the next book was months and years I wasn't spending time on marketing and putting myself out there. And it was a perfect trick of resistance to keep myself from putting myself out there. And once I finished that book, then an idea for another book would come up. It's like, oh no, this is an even greater idea. Like, wow, when you put this one together, like you could really be confident and get out there. People will really love it. Would put a lot of effort in writing it, and in that time I was writing it, I wasn't marketing my other books, so I was kind of just collecting books. And after writing a bunch, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is a pattern that just keeps happening, and if I don't make a conscious effort to stop it, I would keep writing more books. In fact, ideas for books constantly come in my head, like really creative ideas. I think internal resistance is a pretty creative concept. Something no one's really come to, or at least not in the way I'm talking about, or at least in a way that I've heard before. And then, I came up with these other ideas, and I literally consciously have to tell myself no more writing and focus on marketing, because my brain, or a part of me, there is resistance to it. So I do want people to understand tricks come in many forms. In fact, I would say even when we get sick or fall into ill health, it could be a trick that's keeping us from something we deeply desire. Even accidents, because when we fall sick, we have no energy. Like, we need to rest and recover. And because we can't do anything else, it's a perfect way for resistance to keep us from moving forward on that thing, that deep down that we want. Same thing with accidents. When we have an accident, it literally turns our life upside down. It takes all of our energy, even our money and resources to deal with the accident. So all that time, energy, and resources we put in to deal with the accident is time, energy, and resources we're not putting in to that thing we could be doing. So the tricks is a very important concept. I know we kind of introduced it earlier, and many people may not have thought it to be a big deal, but it's actually huge. Our tricks can actually have us avoid life our entire life. I know people who are in various tricks their whole life, and they avoided life because they just weren't aware of how their brain was manipulating them.
It's absolutely fascinating, and I am just floored by the conversation that we're having here this
Yeah,
evening. I appreciate you so much for being here, and
yeah,
I know that there are people that are watching this that are probably thinking the exact same things that I'm thinking.
yeah,
And the first thing I'm thinking, Cam, I'm going to be honest with you. You spent all this time and energy writing 12 books because you didn't want to face the part of marketing the books as you got done. You didn't want to
yeah,
face the critics. You didn't want to do that. Well, guess what, my friend? Right now is your time to market your books on Keeping It
yeah,
Rio. So let's say that someone's watching this right now and they think, you know what? I think that this gentleman is very insightful. I appreciate what he's saying, and I'd like to learn more. I know there are 12 opportunities for us to do that. What are the best ways that folks can purchase your books, can find, any type of content that you may have out there
yeah.
pertaining to any of the topics that you've written about? What are the best ways that we can make that happen?
All right. So my books were really my prior life thing. So I was an author for a good, I would say 13 to 15 years. But then when I started developing this concept of internal resistance, this is what I've really been focused on um, wanting to spread their knowledge about because I think it's really important. So if there was something that people wanted to tap into, it would be this course that I have. It's called Conquer Internal Resistance. And they can find it on my website, kamknight.com. So KAMKNIGHT.com. And even, as we do more, we evolve. So I've even evolved from internal resistance and I do one-on-one work. I developed a technique that helps people quickly tap into their unconscious to work on some of their deepest limitations and insecurities, things that don't get a lot of attention, such as undeserving, feelings of not enough, even shame. I'm not a therapist, so it's like the emotional release you would get in 2 years of therapy, but in 2 hours. And they can reach out to me for that at mentor@kamknight.com. So those are the two main things.
I love it. And I think there's going to be some folks are going to watch this and they're
Yeah,
going to reach out and they're going to say,
yeah,
you know what? I want to learn more about this because now I'm really recognizing these traits within myself or within my loved ones,
yeah,
and I want to get as much information and knowledge as I possibly can. So,
yeah.
Cam, thank you for taking the time to be here. Um, I have a kind of an off the wall question that I love to
Sure.
end this with. And I always talk to folks from all over the world. I've had different people from every corner of the world, different walks of life, different levels of education, different expertise. But in our conversation, one thing I gathered is that you have traveled to over 100 countries.
Yep.
The complete off the wall question to end the Keeping It Rio episode is, what is the most unique place that you've ever been?
It's hard to say. It's like saying what your favorite song is. There's so
Right?
many
There's so
reasons
many.
we can like. Um, Unique. I'm sure if I had a little bit more time, I could think of many unique things. I'll give two really interesting unique things. One is the Guyanas. So South America is mainly Latin, from Colombia all the way down from Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. It's mainly Latin and they speak Spanish and Portuguese. But there are these three tiny countries on the northeast side of South America called the Guyanas. You have French Guiana, Suriname, and Guyana. And in the guidebooks, nobody ever talks about them. It's really hard to get through. And I ended up going just to see what it was. And it's a completely different universe to South America. I was like completely blown away by it. In fact, surprisingly, there's a lot of Indian population over there, which kind of blew my mind considering it's South America. So I found that to be very unique. And another unique place is in Venezuela, a place called Catacumbo. And it's unique because it there's lightning there all the time, but no sound. It's wild. Yeah, yeah. No one talks about it. No, it's hard to get there again. And I went just to see, and it's like really deep into the Amazon rainforest, and literally like I got to spend the night there and just lightning the whole time and not a single thunder sound. So it's pretty wild. And it's an anomaly, like nobody knows why it is and things like that. So, but I'm sure the more I think about it, the more I would come up with, uniqueness, because there's a lot of uniqueness in this world.
Well, those were very impromptu, and you had no idea what the question was going to be. And I think that you just gave us two very interesting places. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that, Cam. Thank you for your time this afternoon, evening. It's actually evening now where we're talking,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to be here. I really gathered a lot from this conversation, and I appreciate the value that you brought to the audience. One thing I must do before we bid each other adieu is I have to sing a little praises myself for my sponsor.
Sure.
And this is going to be a completely different type thing than our entire conversation. But my
Okay.
sponsor, Cam, is a company called roofer.com, ROOFR.com. I told you earlier, I have a roofing company here in San Antonio, Texas. About 8 years ago, I saw this program online that would measure the roofs with a satellite image. And this was Roofer. And Roofer has evolved over the years from being just that simple image measurement tool to now a complete CRM in which my company gathers all of our information for all of our clients. We have it in one central location. We can basically have the initial contact. We can go through and order the measurements. We can put together detailed proposals. We can get the signatures online. We can then order our materials, assign our crews, do everything we need to do all within this one program. And at the end, we can send a link to our clients and say, here's your bill. You can pay it one of in many different ways, but everything's collected online. And then after the fact, it has automated services. It'll send reminders a year from now. Hey, it's time to give us a call for your tune up on your roof. Let us come out, make sure that your debris is not gathered in the gutters. Let's make sure everything's acting right. And that, my friend, is what roofer.com provides to our industry. I love them. They've been my sponsor for the last 3 years. So thank you to everybody at Roofer. If you are in the roofing industry and you don't have Roofer, but you watch my podcast, I'll never be able to figure out what I can say to get you guys on board because I've sold it as best I can for 3 years, and a lot of my friends are on Roofer. So thank you to them. Thank you to our audience who is always supportive and always great. Thank you to the folks that take a chance to be on a podcast with some random guy that they've never met before. Sometimes they turn out terrible, but most of the time they turn out great like this one did. So, Cam, if you have any parting words for our audience, the floor is yours, my friend.
All right, I'll say two things. One is to help out your company, Roofer. It sounds like this company helps businesses streamline their
do.
workflow with as little resistance as possible. So
There
I
you
think
go.
that's I think that's a great thing. I want to leave by saying this really important thing, and it's wanting doesn't equate to having. Just because you want something doesn't mean you'll take the necessary steps to go after it. And it's because of this thing I call resistance. And it's really important to understand that because oftentimes we think just because we want something, we will be able to go after it. But if we can understand that our own selves will get in the way, we can be more prepared. And just by being prepared can exponentially increase our ability to get that thing. So, I want the listeners to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying around for episode 235 of Keeping It Rio. We will see you guys next Thursday, 7 p.m. Central, just like we have every week for the last 234 weeks. It is always an honor to be here for the people, and I hope you guys got something valuable out of today's episode. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, keep on keeping it Rio. We will see you next week. Cam, stick around after this ad for my my sponsor. You and I will finish our conversation, and everybody go on about the rest of your evening. Take care.
We're Roofer. We know that managing a roofing business can be chaotic, so we created a single platform with all the tools you need to easily run your roofing business. Stop switching between multiple different softwares and experience streamlined operations from lead to payment in hours instead of days. Visit roofr.com to get started for free today.